Hey YouTube, here's Heiko. Today is the day that I'm going to be working on my 1974 R90/6 BMW Airhead. I'm expecting a parts delivery today, and in this short section I'm just going to recap all the stuff that I found wrong with my motorcycle and the things that we kind of have to correct before we put it all back together. Alright, let me take you for a tour. Alright, so let's start here on the motorcycle itself. It was a riding motorcycle which was just constantly leaking oil out of the pushrod tube seals that are installed here into the opening, like so. And when I finally then got to the point to uninstall the cylinders and take a look at the pushrod tube seals, I actually noticed that they were installed the wrong way. The ripped section needs to go into the opening in the housing. This line here on the side needs to be to the bottom, kind of like that. And then this cone-shaped section goes towards the cylinder. And they were installed inside out, upside down, whatever you want to call it. But no big deal, I have a set of new ones. Then I first initially wanted to leave the pistons with the rings inside the cylinder, so not to disturb anything, and just reinstall it with new gaskets and then call it a day. But then as I was looking at things, I noticed, yeah, let's turn on some more light for you. I noticed that at least one of the two cylinders, oh, this one here, see that line? Scoring line in the cylinder, which isn't great. It's not super deep. I can barely feel it with my finger, but it's not great. So then I decided, okay, let's pull the pistons out, buy a new set of piston rings right there, and just replace the piston rings. We're going to use this old-fashioned adjustable hone with some lubrication and give it a cleanup and a new crosshatch so that the new piston rings can seat properly. Then of course I needed to clean up the pistons, and we did a bunch of experimenting on carbon removal, the chemical carbon removal, without using any kind of scraping and sanding and wire brushing and whatnot, but that didn't really bring us anywhere. I tried every method in the book. ATF mixed with acetone, I tried ultrasonic cleaner, I tried cam dip made by Berryman, which supposedly removes carbon, didn't. I tried, what else did we try? Mineral spirits. We tried oven cleaner, which actually gave me most of the progress, but the layer of carbon on the piston was rather thick. And then what else? Oh yeah, a gun cleaner. It's called Pro M7 or M Pro 7. It made a little bit of progress, but not enough. And so then ultimately I ended up using the wire wheel. And in the cylinder heads I used a little wire wheel on a die grinder. And ultimately cleaned it up pretty nicely. We still have some last little bit of touch up, and I want to clean up the surface completely with some Scotch-Brite pad. So yeah, scoring in the cylinders, I hope after, I'm not gonna do like lots of honing. I'm gonna give it like 4 or 5 passes with a hone stone and see where we end up. And I hope that's gonna be clean enough for new piston rings. I wanted to get this measured. The only machine shop that we have here in town, oh yeah, I can't do that right now. So since I had compression before and the engine was running fine, and I'm putting new piston rings on, and I'm just gonna do clean up hone and that's it, I think we're gonna be fine. I hope at least. So yeah, everything's gonna get cleaned up. The sealing surfaces here get cleaned up. What else did we find wrong? Oh yeah, Then my cylinder heads, I did a lot of decarboning on that side too. I still need to do a little more with maybe a tiny little brass brush inside the exhaust because it's pretty carboned over. And then, you know, taking out the valves. Here's one that is really pitted, and I don't know why. The rest of the cylinder head looks just fine. There's no pitting going on here in the cylinder head. Absolutely none. And so I can't explain. The exhaust valve has, besides still some leftover carbon, there's no pitting going on. I don't know if they maybe took a chisel to it to take the carbon off at some point in its life. We're gonna replace this one. The other side has like 2-3 little nicks. I'm just gonna leave this. I cleaned it up pretty nicely. The valve doesn't look super worn either. So eventually this edge here gets thinner and thinner as the valve bangs into the valve seat, but this looks pretty good. Lapping is going to do the trick. The exhaust valves are the same. So we're getting in one new valve, and then in the process of taking everything apart, I realized this. One of the valve guides completely loose. This sucker is like completely loose. I was able to, with minimal effort, to pull this out of the head. I could move it up and down just with my finger, and it looked like it has been loose and has been spinning in here for a while. It's all polished up. So now I measured this with a micrometer sitting right here. This is 14.04 millimeters, and the next oversize, so originally I guess the standard size is 14.06. This is 14.04 here in the shiny section. I'm assuming that this is just worn off from spinning in circles. And now we're getting a 14.09. And then I have an adjustable hone if I have to hone this open. I also have a little lathe that I can maybe sand down the new one if it's too large, too much interference. You're looking for maybe 0.02, so 0.02 of a millimeter of interference fit. And if the new one is just too fat to go in here, I will either sand this one down, the new one down, or hone this open. I'm probably gonna rather play with this because cylinder heads, once you ruin them, they are ruined, and this one here can easily be replaced. So yeah, we're waiting for a guide and one valve, and then I also have already figured out how I'm gonna drive. Of course, I'm gonna put this on a hot plate to get it evenly heated to whatever temperature. Then I'm going to help it out with a propane torch to heat up the section here before I drive in the new guide. And I'll most likely put the guide into the freezer. And since I have an old one here, at the top end, the side that sticks out where the valve spring goes on top, there is a little circlip. Focus camera. There's a little step on the top here, and this step fits a 10 millimeter 3/8 drive socket perfectly. And then as a guide, I will use the shaft of the old worn, spent, pitted valve. So kind of like that. So I will be able to drive this in like that. And then we're gonna try to lap the valve in and check how concentric the new guide is with the valve seat and the valve. If it's not concentric, I have a coworker who has valve grinding equipment, so then I can go over there to his garage and we're gonna regrind, like do a touch-up grind. I mean, the valve seats here in this bike actually look rather pleasant, no problems. So we're gonna try to just correct the concentricity so that the valve lines up with its own valve seat, so we don't have to do anything other than that. And since these are one angle ground valves, not like on some cars where you have like 3 different angles, I think we should be okay. So new guide, checking concentricity, then lapping everything in and cleaning, of course. I'm gonna also do a outside cleaning with aluminum bright cleaner, or what is it called, S10. It's an aluminum cleaner for motorcycles. Best way to get all those parts absolutely clean so there is no grit on it, because you don't want to put any engine part together with grit or sand or dirt, or just wash them with soapy water. Hot water, soap in it, wash them, brush them, rinse them, and then you just got to dry them off really nicely. I'm also, after heating this and putting the guide in, I will put the cylinder head, the surface, on a glass plate with 1000 grit sandpaper to clean it up and also to make sure it's still flat. On both, of course. And I think once the guide is back in and the valves are lapped back in, and the honing, cleanup hone, you can't correct what's going on here. So if it's too worn, or if it's like already like a barrel shape in there, or the gouges are too deep, you can't correct that with a hand hone on your cordless drill at home. You can only clean up the surface. Once that's all done, then we're gonna start putting stuff back together. I already inspected the cam followers or lifters in there. They are fine, they're good. I told you that my cylinder head gaskets were installed incorrectly, and therefore maybe we can not have this in this paper anymore. Come on. And therefore I have rubbing marks from the push rods rubbing against the incorrectly installed cylinder head gasket. I guess that's a kind of a common thing. They're not symmetrical. You can actually install the cylinder head gasket the wrong way. So here, I'll show you real quick. Here's an old cylinder head gasket. And we're going over to the one cylinder head. So you line up all the bolt holes. This is lined up correctly. So you see that the holes in the gasket line up with the push rod holes. If you flip it around and then line up the bolt holes, you see that the holes of the push rod, or for the push rods, don't line up just as nicely. So these are not exactly symmetrical. You gotta make sure you put it on the right way, or else you get rubbing marks on your push rods. I was a little worried about it, especially on one. It was a little deeper, but everyone I asked, they say as long as they are straight, I should be fine. So these are actually 3-piece push rods. Middle section is aluminum, and then the end sections is hardened steel. Why they do aluminum is when the engine gets warm, the cylinder and the cylinder head, they grow, they expand, so they get longer. And if you have a push rod that is made out of steel, like these old ones here, I think they're from a /5, they are steel, they have hardened steel caps on a steel push rod. I could use those, they are the same length, they are pretty much the same engine, right? But they don't expand the same amount. So if you have all aluminum cylinders and all aluminum heads, they will expand in accordance to their specific expansion coefficient, heating expansion coefficient. And if you then use aluminum push rods, they will expand at the same rate. And if you mix that with steel push rods, they will expand at a different rate, and therefore it will mess up your valve lash. So if you set your valve lash at cold engine, Then your valve lash with an aluminum push rod will be the same once the engine is heated up, or close to be the same. If you use steel push rods, you're going to be off. So you set it at cold temperature or cold engine, and then suddenly the adjustment is completely off once the engine warms up. That's why they went to aluminum. And then the other reason is it's quieter, apparently. I don't know really for sure, but I'm going to be reusing those. Yeah, rub marks, right? I was considering these, but the ends don't look too great. You want to make sure that your cam follower has two surfaces. One is this little cup in there, that's where the push rod goes in, and the other side is a machined flat surface that runs against the camshaft. You want to make sure that nothing has pits or damages, neither your camshaft, which you can inspect from up here, nor the cam follower. So I'm picking the nicer parts, which are the originals that I pulled out of here. You see here's one stud missing. That was the only stud that was loose. You need to adjust them to about 9" 15/16 or 10 inches, somewhere in between. So close to 10 inches. They should go in pretty snugly. It's a steel stud going into aluminum housing. Should be fine. This one down there was just loose, and I wanted to inspect if maybe the threading in the aluminum is like stripped, but it is fine. So on that loose one, either I just put it in loose and adjust it to the same length as the other three, or I just put one tiny little teensy tiny little drop of blue Loctite on it so that it will stay in place during installation. And that's most likely what I'm going to do. The other ones here I haven't even checked. They are not loose. Oh, this one is loose. So I might do the same. Might just leave it in there. Also want to make sure that I clean up the threads really nicely, so during installation and torquing of the heads that I don't have any grime or grit getting stuck in the nut and then falsifying the torque values. But yeah, we're getting there. We're getting there. I hope I get all the parts, and then I hope I can install the valve guide without a hitch and lap in the valve without having to regrind the seat. That would be great. All right, so that's a little update here. So today just more cleaning. I'll bring you back once the parts are all cleaned up.
So after this quick little recap of all the things that we found wrong with the motorcycle, I'm now getting ready to hone, just clean up hone of the cylinders. You see me cleaning with WD-40. I'm also using WD-40 as the lubricant for the hone stones that are on this little cheap hone from auto parts store. There's an adjustment. You can change the spring tension on it to give the stones more pressure against the cylinder walls. Hand drill. You got to figure out what kind of RPM you spin it at and how fast you move this in and out to get a proper 45-degree crosshatch pattern. Now you see me fiddling around with 3 piston rings. So there are always 2 compression rings and an oil ring. And before you put that all back together, you definitely want to check the end gap. So you shove one of the piston rings into the cylinder. You can test or measure in multiple locations. I just picked a position, then I'm using a little steel ruler to make sure that the piston ring is level in the cylinder, and then you use feeler gauges to measure your gap between the 2 ends of the piston ring. And the manufacturer of a motorcycle will always give you a tolerance. So you're supposed to be a minimum of 0.2 millimeters and a maximum of 0.6, something like that. I have a BMW service manual that has that actually listed. My end gap was a little on the large side, so slightly larger than what the manufacturer's specification was giving me. But then after talking to a few Airhead old-timers, and they said that's acceptable, that's fine. And then again, the bike was running before, and had good compression, no problems other than the oil leak on the pushrod tube seals, and of course all the things that we then found when we took the engine apart. But so far so good. The problem is that if you start machining cylinders, then you need to buy oversized pistons, and then it suddenly gets really expensive and takes way more time. And I rather wanted to get the bike back together to ride. If I ever get to the point that I have problems again, I will probably just buy a cylinder kit from Siebenrock and put a 1000cc cylinder and piston kit on there. So measure on one cylinder, then I will measure on the other one as well. Now you see my freezer. This is the valve guide in my freezer and my cylinder head on a hot plate. So I'm cooling one part and heating the other part. And then you of course need some thick gloves. In the meantime, I'm using a dye to clean up the threads on the cylinder head studs there to make sure the threads are really clean and smooth. That's just a precaution. You don't necessarily have to do that, but since I'm at it. And then I'm using one of those laser thermometers to test if my cylinder head is hot enough. And then I'm getting the valve guide. I'm using an old valve and a socket as an kind of a mandrel to drive the guide in, using a rather small hammer because I want to make sure that I'm not pounding it in so hard and then I'm cracking the cylinder head. I want to make sure that my interference fit of my 14.09 valve guide with the cylinder is just the right amount of friction there. And it went in really well. And then afterwards, after cooling down, it was actually tight and in there.
So while we're waiting for the cylinder head that we just punched a new guide in, we can check a few other things. The pushrod tubes, I don't know if they're installed correctly, if they will have enough pressure on the seals, but I roughly know how high from the bottom of the cylinder here, this is the bottom of the cylinder where the base gasket goes, they need to be roughly 1.8 millimeters with this ring here, with this step, below the base surface. Way too low. So these need to come out this way. That's not good because it's really painful to get those driven this direction.
The pushrod tubes are also interference fit into the cylinders. Usually they heat the cylinders and cool the pushrod tubes. In my case, since I'm really only making small adjustments and with an interference fit, there is still a little bit of some moving possible. I'm using some sockets to push them in or to drive them out, depending on which direction they need to go. By the way, the ring on there it's a separate piece. It sits on a small step that's machined onto the pushrod tube. You got to make sure that this ring is all the way on there. So you're not just moving the ring around, but you are moving the entire pushrod in or out, depending on which direction you need to move it. So 1.8 millimeters below the base surface. And feeler gauges are used to adjust that. And then, of course, I do that on both cylinders to make sure that each of my new pushrod tube seals gets the same pressure. And then now you're seeing me using some brake cleaner to clean up the pushrod tube and that ring. And I'm using some green penetrating thread locker to secure the ring on the pushrod tube. They are also an interference fit, so they're not supposed to be loose, but yeah, sometimes they are. So that's that. And then we're going to put that aside. So now the cylinder head has cooled down. The new guide is there. I'm grabbing a valve and I'm putting some oil on the stem just so that I'm not running a dry, gritty valve inside my new guide. And I'm using a Sharpie to paint or blacken the seal surface on the valve, and I'm spinning it in position to see if the new valve guide and the valve seat that's in the cylinder, if those two parts are still concentric. And the way Sharpie rubs off, you can tell whether or not that's the case. If it's not concentric, then you have to machine the valve seat, which requires special equipment, takes more time. And I guess I got lucky that my new valve guide is perfectly concentric with the valve seat.
It's taking the Sharpie off all the way around. So we are good. We're good. We don't have to regrind this valve seat. No regrinding, just relapping. I'm really excited about that. Yes! Okay, how are we gonna hold on to this thing? So now we put some metal grinding compound. Since I have relatively clean valve seats and obviously a concentric match of the valve with the valve seat. Oh yeah, and we should not forget to occasionally put a little drop of juice on here so that we're not running a dry metal something inside a brand new valve seat, valve guide.
Now I'm giving the valve that runs in that new valve guide a good lapping job with lapping compound. And yeah, very simple, just this little $5 tool with a suction cup at the bottom. And in between you have to check and then reapply lapping compound and do it all over again. Don't forget to put some lubricant on the valve stem or you're wearing out your brand new valve guide. And just, yeah, be patient. It takes a few rounds. And then once it's lapped in, both surfaces, the valve seat as well as the sealing surface on the valve itself, they will have a very kind of a dull or like a flat sheen gray surface. And then you know that you have lapped it in. And yeah, so that's what I'm doing there right now. That takes a little while. And of course, I want to do as good of a job as possible so that we have perfectly sealing valves at the end of the day. And in between, always lifting up the valve. So while you're spinning it around, you're squishing the lapping compound out. And by lifting the valve a little bit with a suction cup, you're sucking the compound back in between the valve seat and the valve itself. And then again, cleaning, checking, cleaning again, and a little bit more. They make lapping compound in two grits, so coarse and fine. So now I'm already doing a different valve there. There it goes. So ultimately we have to lap in all 4 valves, 2 intake and 2 exhaust valves. Takes a fair amount of time, but as I mentioned on my motor here, the valve seats and the valve sealing surfaces on the valves themselves, they look all pretty clean, pretty good. So I didn't have any problems with deposits and with burned valves and such. Some people use fuel line that they put into a cordless drill and then spin it with a cordless drill. I like the mechanical, the conventional way.
Absolutely all the way around. cylinder cleaning. This is the surface for the cylinder head gasket, and that needs to be clean and preferably flat. The cylinder head gaskets, they have a heat activated sealant, and this stuff sticks to the surface here pretty well. So scraping with a razor blade and then a little bit of some Scotch-Brite. So let's see if we can. This is left, this is right. Let's see if we can take the old piston rings out without breaking them. One of those cheapo, oh, goes this way, I think. That works rather well. You just gotta make sure not to bend them open too far. But other than that, only the second one here doesn't work too well because it's between two other piston rings, but it works without breaking anything. So that's good practice for putting on the new ones.
So after all the mechanical cleaning, now I am switching to cleaning the exterior of the cylinders. And don't be hesitant to use soapy water and a brush. Warm soapy water and a dish detergent is still the best way to get grease and grime and stuff off of things. And as long as you clean parts afterwards, there's no problem. You know, big shops, they have a kind of a dishwasher even for engine parts that they stick them in. Hot water and some sort of detergent that they use, probably specifically made for machine parts. And there's probably also some sort of corrosion inhibitor in that detergent. Of course, nobody has that at home. So I'm just using engine degreaser, my garden hose. I think there's nothing wrong with that. Here is S100 coming out. That is a aluminum cleaner that brightens aluminum as well. So you just spray that on, let it sit. It's actually a motorcycle cleaner, so you can use that on your entire bike. You got to make sure that it doesn't dry on. It's kind of a gel type liquid that comes out of that spray bottle. And yeah, and then just water and a brush and scrubbing, so nothing is left behind. So I already cleaned the seal surfaces, top and bottom on the cylinders. And then after taking the piston rings out, you want to make sure the piston ring grooves are absolutely pristine before you put new piston rings on there. And now I'm getting the cylinder heads out as well. There are no valves in there yet, no springs, just the empty cylinder head. And the S100 motorcycle cleaner and the garden hose. And you see my air hose already sitting there. And that's a bucket with warm water. Now I'm getting a few more tools out. These are actually gun cleaning tools. One is a barrel brush. I don't know what caliber I use there, but they are usually brass or copper, and they are gentle on those aluminum parts. I'm cleaning in between the fins of the cylinder head, and the other thing was just a brass cleaning brush, also for gun cleaning primarily. You can buy barrel brushes and also those little brass wire brushes or copper wire brushes as a pack of 50 off of Amazon. Pretty inexpensive. I always have them lying around. I use those for all kinds of purposes. And yeah, and then rinsing and rinse and repeat. Drying with the air hose. It's kind of funny how that works. So you think you're done cleaning, and then you look at it from a different angle and you find a little bit more dirt, and then you start all over again. So, oh yeah, and you see me, I mean, of course, I'm working on the ground, very primitive. So even though I have a parts cleaner in the garage, but I've noticed that especially when I have more than one little part, it's just quicker with a garden hose and some engine degreaser.
So our parts wash cycle 1 is completed. Tomorrow is going to be, or no, next time I work on this, not tomorrow, it's going to be another wash cycle. In between this and the next one, I'm going to remove a couple little pieces of carbon here and there, and maybe a little bit more of the sealing material, especially this here, which I haven't touched yet. So, and before I oil anything, the ends of the pushrod tubes, they're so nicely exposed and clean right now that I will wash them out with brake clean. Then blow it out with air, and then put our penetrating thread locker back in there. More or less as a sealant, not to keep them in place, but to seal the ends off. Okay, like that. And now we're just going to put a couple of drops of this stuff in there and hope it penetrates. Hey guys, I just finished up my wife's inner and outer tie rod ends, and tomorrow is going to be BMW reassembly day. I still have to run this cylinder head over a piece of sandpaper on a piece of glass to just clean this up. The exhaust port still has a lot of carbon. On a someone else's YouTube channel, I was made aware of this here. Berkeybill gum cutter, instant gum cutter, supposedly really capable in dissolving carbon on contact, but this stuff is also very toxic, poisonous, bad. So we're outside. I have my chemical resistant gloves, goggles, and even a respirator with organic vapor filters. This stuff here is actually made in the US of A. Berkeybill Oil Company, Somerset, Pennsylvania. That stuff. Order 2 cans online on Amazon. I have never seen this anywhere in the store. So we'll see if this actually does something. So I'm just gonna suit up. Okay, respirator, goggles. So parts are more or less ready. Carbon, last little lapping of the valves, and then clean up, wash, and then reassembly. Hey guys, we're still in the process of cleaning, more cleaning, and some more cleaning. Here are my valve train parts that have all been inspected, and now some hardcore 100%ers will probably get a nervous breakdown, but the little pads that ride on the valve on these rockers here, I had to polish a little bit because they had a little bit of some wear going on. We'll see if this holds up. I'm in the process of cleaning up the base gasket surface. As you can see, I also took the lifters, flat tappet lifters or cam followers, whatever you want to call it. They are going to be reinstalled with some assembly lube, which is pretty much a thick, really thick honey-like oil that gives us a good start when you first start the engine up before oil pressure is there. Degrease the gasket surface with brake cleaner, and then a couple things that are not really mentioned very often, but where's my little wire? I have a mechanics wire / tool. Where is it? Man, this has turned into a massive mess here. Massive mess. Oh, here's the wire. Okay, let's take that over there. So you take a little piece of wire like this, and then right up above the upper two cylinder head studs or cylinder studs, there's a hole, and that hole on both of those, one here, one over there, one there, these holes are the oil supply for your valve train. So pretty much the oil comes out here with pressure, follows the hole in the entire cylinder and the cylinder head, and then exits here at the upper mounting point of your of your rocker shafts. And then if you ever look into the hole of your rocker shaft, here, let me turn on some light for you. When you then look into the upper hole of your rocker shaft, you can see that they are drilled in there, and that's how the oil gets from the drilled hole around the stud into your bearings in your rocker. That's how that all gets lubricated. So up here, oh my goodness, the camera focusing on everything but what I wanted to. Those holes up there, they have to be clear and clean. If you use too much ultra gray silicone sealant when you put the base gasket on and you smear those shut, then your rockers are not going to get any oil. So, and that's the same on both sides. So the top bolts is where the oil delivery to your rockers happens. So these need to be absolutely free and clear. Then you also need to make sure that your studs are set to the right length. Somewhere between 9/15/16, some say 9/7/8, and 10 inches is the length from the case to the end of the stud. So I cleaned all those. You got to make sure that they are clean, so when you slide on the cylinder head and the cylinder, that you're not pushing dirt along this thing and then get it stuck in there. So got to make sure this is all clean, the studs are clean, the threads are clean, the base gasket surface. Then down in here where the pushrod tube seals go, make sure that you don't have any grime, dirt, gunk around there. So when you put it back together, that you're not introducing any kind of contaminants. And then of course your wrist pin or your bearing up here in the connecting rod, that needs to be clean and clear as well. All those bits and pieces here, I always do washing, drying, oiling, blowing, all the combinations of those things. And yeah, this surface here is not prepared. The valves are not clean, the springs are not clean, my little keepers are not clean yet. Over here are the pistons and cylinders and cylinder heads. They're not clean, they need another wash. And then we're eventually going to start putting the valves back in the heads and the springs, but everything after I have created myself a really clean work surface and have everything else done. So all cleaned out. Make sure the oil openings are clear. You don't glue those in here with Loctite. It's not necessary. I mean, some of them are looser than others, but as soon as you put a nut on the outside here and you torque it down, they're not going to come loose anymore. So I had a couple that were really loose, so I inspected the threads in there. They are fine. Just make sure your oil supply line is clean and secure. What else did I want to mention? Oh yeah, yeah, just to show you the little pad is polished up, so any of the wear marks that it had are now gone. I'm hoping that the heat treated surface is thick enough that it could handle my little bit of cleanup, but I'm pretty confident. And if not, you just gotta listen to your valve train. If your valve train starts getting noisy, just take it apart and look at it. All right, so we're getting there. We're slowly but steadily getting there. I'm gonna get all those parts now cleaned up. That's the next here. And then clean work surface, and then those, and then reassembly.